From Social Prosperity Partners, this is Community Catalysts. Welcome to Community Catalysts. I'm your host, Matt Lehrman. On May 17, 2017, before Social Prosperity Partners had a name, a website, or a single client, there were simply two longtime friends meeting for drinks and thinking out loud. We weren't drafting a business plan. We were wrestling with questions shaped by decades of experience. One career spent in municipal leadership, the other in nonprofit management. For hours, we circled around questions like these. What happens when fear drives public life instead of responsibility? What enables communities to turn down the burners on the issues that divide them without turning away from the work that must be done? And what skills must local leaders cultivate if self-government is to function with steadiness and integrity? Well, the person who helped give those questions shape and depth is with me today. John Little is my co-founder in the creation of Social Prosperity Partners and a trusted friend of more than 30 years. Over a distinguished career with the city of Scottsdale, he rose from an entry-level budget analyst position to the responsibility of city manager, ultimately helping lead a community of 250,000 residents, 2,600 employees, and a $2 billion operating and capital enterprise. Along the way, he guided billions of dollars in downtown investment, strengthened enduring community institutions, and earned recognition for a quality of personal leadership marked by innovation, integrity, caring, courage, and service. But today is not about accolades. It is about the intellectual DNA of the practice that we launched together that fateful day. The conviction that civic life advances when individuals are willing to raise their hands in service to their neighbors. The belief that communities need deliberate spaces for thoughtful and sometimes difficult conversation. The idea that civic responsibility is not instinctive, but learned, practiced, and passed from one generation to the next. John has recently stepped into the role of Partner Emeritus at Social Prosperity Partners, a reflection of the stature he holds in our shared work and the foundation he helped build. His thinking continues to shape how we ask questions, how we frame challenges, and how we serve leaders across the country. For years, he has also served as the executive producer of this podcast, helping sharpen its inquiry from the very beginning. My friend and partner, I am grateful for the chance to continue to explore these questions with you and to do it with the recording button on so I get to say it officially. John Little, welcome to Community Catalysts.
Oh, thank you, Matt. I'm super delighted to be with you today. I know we're going to have a great conversation.
I should just tell everyone, we are sitting in my dining room, right? We're at my house having this conversation in person. The only thing that's different is we haven't cracked the bottle of wine just yet, but maybe we'll get to that a little later.
All right.
John, I want to start by asking you about something out of your personal experience that I know I've heard you talk about before. You grew up in Minneapolis at a time when the voices of John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy, they were speaking directly to a generation about service and responsibility. When you think back to yourself as a young man listening to them, what captivated you about that?
I'm happy that you asked me that. It actually goes back further than when I was a young man. Went back to when I was a boy of 10 years old. And I remember my father putting me on his shoulders and taking me down to Minnehaha Parkway and Park Avenue. And he put me on his shoulders for a big event that was going to happen. And what it was the motorcade of the President of the United States, John Kennedy. And I sat on his shoulders and I watched the motorcade come by and I saw Jackie and Jack. Ordinarily, that might not make a huge impression on a boy, except for the fact that my father's name was Jack and my mother's name was Jackie. And I'm John Jr. And we were Irish Catholic. We bought at the time a LP. My parents bought an LP and they played John Kennedy's inaugural address nonstop in the house over and over again. And I listened to that as a young boy between 10 and 11 years old. It was his speech, of course, where he talked about ask not what your country can do for you. I think I knew as a young boy that I wanted to be in the public service. I think that was a seminal, primordial kind of event that had a lasting impact on me.
What did it mean to be in public service as a child, as a young man?
To be in public service, to me, it meant volunteering and doing things in the community. And especially as a young man in school, I was very active. I was in all the social clubs that I could join. At the University of Minnesota, I worked with the committee that founded Earth Day, April 15th. We started working with Ralph Nader, one of the very first PIRGs in the country, which is the public interest research group that he started. And I traveled to different college campuses organizing PIRGs at different universities. And so to me, it meant rolling up your sleeves and getting your hands dirty and being involved.
It's interesting because idealism is sometimes thought of as being intellectual and lofty. You're talking about idealism as hands-on and active.
I am. I think one of my career regrets was not having pursued a stint in the Peace Corps. To me, that would have been an unbelievable opportunity. And those people that did, who I've talked to over the years, always cite that as one of the most important events that ever happened in their lives. And I do believe that's a wonderful model for civic involvement, is understanding that it's not just about intellectualizing civic engagement, but actually doing some of the heavy lifting.
So your idealism led you to study what in college and to pursue what career early on?
In college, I was in urban studies. I was very excited about learning how people live together and how to build communities. It was during the 1968 to 1973 Vietnam War days, and I learned about activism, and I learned the power of getting groups energized and working together. And it was an incredibly dynamic time. And so, yes, I think I learned, many of the skills I came to rely on later in life during those formative years, where you couldn't do it alone. You always had to pull groups of people together, people with ideas, people with dreams.
Tell me about some of the lessons that you learned. What are one or two of them that you can think are rooted in those experiences?
I think the first one is you can't do it alone. Community building involves getting people together around a shared vision. One of the things that we always learn about shared visions is that oftentimes the shared vision is the easy part. It's trying to allow the different pathways that people see as a way of getting there and bringing those together and harnessing them. I think it's a lot like music. A good band, let's say the Beatles, they all had different skills, they had different abilities, they had different approaches, but somehow or another they were able to create magic together. And I think that applies in civic engagement and civic involvement as well.
Is there another lesson from those very early days that you can put your finger on?
I think the importance of leadership. Nothing happens without leadership, which we confuse often with volunteerism and other activities we see other people engaged in. But leadership is, I'm still not certain even today whether it's a skill that you learn or something that, as a former city manager that I worked for, just described it as that it factor. Someone who walks in a room and commands the attention of people that are in the room, who are anxious and excited to hear what that person has to say. That has always seemed to be an important catalyst to beginning any kind of important venture.
that it factor? Is that charisma, or is it even beyond charisma?
I think it starts with charisma, but ultimately people are watching the leader to see what kind of credibility they have, what kind of consistency they have, what kind of messaging they have, what kind of sense of fairness they have, how good of a listener they have. It's a compendium of many, many different things. But I think it does start with charisma. I think it starts with that kind of person, that kind of presence, I should say, that causes you to want to pay attention to that person. It could be their eyes, it could be their demeanor, it could be the way they walk into the room, it could be the way they gesture to people, or they welcome and greet people, their kindness, their compassion. There's many, many things that go into it, but ultimately, it's important to be in a room with people that understand what leadership means and what it is.
I often think that beyond the charisma, it's also the ability to read the emotional content of the room and to give people what they need in the moment, not just to be a bright light in the room, but to actually be responsive to the people who are there, to help them feel connected, respected, and heard.
Yes, I think that's really critically important. One of my favorite courses when I was at the university was a course I took twice in different levels, but it was small group communication. It was understanding the dynamics of what happens in a small group when you have multiple leaders, or when you have no leaders, a leaderless group, for example. I think understanding the dynamics of how people communicate with each other in a small group setting is vital to understanding civic engagement on a larger scale.
As a young man, do you consider yourself to be that kind of a charismatic leader yourself?
Yes, I do. Unabashedly, he says.
Well, what I'm really going to ask is, do you think that was nature or nurture? Is that a quality you were born with, or do you think that there were skills that you learned along the way that actually helped you be that way?
My father was a traveling salesman. He was good looking. He was, I think, charismatic. He had the Irish gift of gab. He was the kind of person people wanted to be around. My mother was charming, just like Jackie Kennedy. She was charming, big, beautiful smile, welcoming, a wonderful host at any gathering. And I watched my parents and how they collected people around. And people wanted to be around my parents because they smiled and they were authentic and they were genuine. They had Irish sense of humor. And I think laughter is a really important, the ability to laugh even at difficult times is a really important thing.
You certainly learned that lesson. And that's why, again, we're sitting in my dining room here, but this is why you're one of my wife's favorite dinner guests of all times, because you bring the energy to the dinner table.
Well, I'm flattered. Thank you.
I'm curious, John, as you began then to have a career after school, can you think about how your idealism matured along with you? And even as you reflect back over a long career, are there elements of that initial idealism that even stay with you to this day?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, not too long ago. In the 1960s, whether it was the music or the poetry or the social movements of the time, but we really believed we could change the world. The Vietnam War was raging. 1964 was the passage of the Civil Rights Act. And so our social dynamics were changing. And we felt sincerely like we were going to change the world. Women's rights were finally being discussed and brought to the fore, being top of mind. And so I spent a lot of time imagining and looking for the impacts of the things that we were doing. Over time, I looked back. In fact, I've had opportunities to kind of look back and think about it. And we didn't do all the things we set out to do. We started Earth Day, but we still have environmental discussions that are talking about climate change and everything else that's still critical. Race relations have gotten better, but we didn't change the world and we didn't fix it. And so I've come to have a more realistic view of what changing the world means. That it was a huge dream and goal and vision and mission. But over time, it became more satisfactory to be more realistic about it and looking for small victories and say, well, we didn't fix poverty. We didn't fix homelessness, but we've given people some houses. We've sheltered some people that didn't have homes before. And I've learned to, as I've matured, to accept that sometimes small changes are good enough.
John, as we were talking, I'm just struck by how idealism meets reality. And you weren't just inspired by the idea of public service, you lived inside it. And you practiced it here in Scottsdale, a growing city, for a very long time. And there are a number of questions I want to ask you about your overall career experience. And as I've been preparing for this conversation, I was thinking about so many lived experiences that you've carried through the years, patterns that you saw in real rooms with real consequences that ultimately have shaped the work that we've done together. And so I want to explore a few of those. Let me begin by mentioning something that you named very explicitly when we first started talking about what became Social Prosperity Partners. You said, and I'm kind of quoting here, that communities need to learn how to put fear in its place. And working over the years, what I've observed about you is that's not just a casual observation. You've come back to that theme numerous times. And on the one hand, you've taught leaders that sometimes your job is to calm fear, to lower the temperature so that judgment can return. And yet I've also heard you say that sometimes fear can be a useful signal. It can tell us when something important is at stake, and it can create urgency and it can awaken responsibility. Let me ask you to elaborate on this. When you say put fear in its place as a purpose of local leadership, what do you think that really means?
It means unfreezing people's reality, their perception of reality. The University of Southern California, the head of the sociology department there, had written a book a number of years ago that I thought made a lot of sense. And he called fear the social pathology of our generation. What he was talking about was the paralysis that comes from oftentimes being fearful of things that were really not very likely to happen. You and I have seen the transition from a time when we lived in perhaps even this town where we wouldn't lock our doors at night. We'd leave our windows open. We'd drive around with our cars unlocked. We'd let our kids go to the playground by themselves or ride their bikes around the neighborhood. And I noticed over time the degradation of that kind of trust in each other in our community. That somehow or another, I have a really good example of this, but there were a few times that I've asked an elderly person if I could help them take their groceries out to their car and load them in the back of their trunk. And they look at me with fear that this sort of, that strangers are dangerous automatically. And I think that I began to see lots of examples where we were distancing ourselves. As an urban planner, I'll call myself an urban planner, we build cities. We began to build cities that had walls around the backyards. that had gates in front of in order to gain access to the community. We stopped putting porches and patios in the front, and people would drive into their garage, they'd lower the garage door, and then they'd go inside their bubble and they wouldn't interact anymore. And I began to see many, many, many examples of our distancing from each other. And I think it was a direct result of people's fearfulness. The second part of your question was about, is that a double-edged sword? Fear can be a tremendous motivator. We know fear is a very primordial fight, flight, evokes that kind of a reaction. It inspires us to do things, it inspires us to run or to change or to do something to deal with that fear. And so, I think I've just, over time, I've been very aware of the role that fear plays in our lives. And, just to put a little footnote on this, we see that a lot of politicians at all levels of government are pretty tapped into things that frighten people. Fear is an easy thing to exploit. Fear is not an easy thing to vanquish. It's not enough for me to tell someone, don't worry, if you send your kid to the park, the incidence of stranger abduction of children is so unlikely as to be statistically insignificant. It really doesn't happen. But it doesn't mean that people are going to suddenly stop fearing that or being reasonable about, good parenting. So it's a very complicated emotion that can be used as a motivator. It can also be used as a weapon.
John, I want you to imagine that you were giving an orientation message for new mayors, new city council members, even school board members. And the lesson you want to share is that you, local leader, have a responsibility to put fear in its place. What does that actually mean to the local leader? What would you have them do?
The first thing that comes to mind is, it's become a cliche, is transparency. When we are absent information, we tend to fill it with things, with other information. Sometimes it's not true, or sometimes it creates fear. So I would tell a mayor or city council that one of the best ways to manage and mitigate people's fears in the community is to be transparent. And this is another topic perhaps that we don't even have time for today, but to do what you say you're going to do, follow through. Consistency of messaging and action builds trust. And when there's trust, there's less fear.
So momentum, right? Making promises, delivering on promises, and having a pattern of doing that you see as a way of putting fear in its place, because people will have confidence, not just in the individual leaders, but in the institutions that are doing that work.
Yes. People will, if you don't give them the information that they need, they will fill in the blanks, and they won't fill them in very well.
John, something that naturally follows from the idea of fear is this. I've heard you talk about the importance of managing the temperature in a room. In fact, when I go back to our notes of our May 17, 2017 meeting, and I kept the notes, when we were first shaping this work, we used phrases like turning down the burners, slow down and open up. That's one of your favorites. Holding space. And again, it wasn't abstract language. It came from what you had seen in council chambers and in community settings. So before we talk about any specific situation, let's just talk about the principle itself. When you say that temperature matters so much in local government, what does that mean to you? What does the temperature mean to you?
The temperature to me is directly related to people's frustration with understanding the issue that may be being discussed. When I talk about slowing down, and it's often in the context of saying, can we honor the complexity of this issue? This is not something we need to race forward or or introduce a lot of emotion into. But let's see if we can take a deeper dive and see if we can develop a more thorough understanding of what all the issues are and what the implications are. And I don't think that can be done oftentimes in maybe in a single meeting on an important issue. I think it's really important to slow down and allow ourselves the time to really go deep on issues.
The phrase that you use is slow down and open up.
Yes.
And the idea is that human psychology is that humans want to speed through uncomfortable moments, right? As if they were like speed bumps on the road. The problem is if you go really fast over a speed bump, it can do real damage to your car. It's really jarring. The idea of slow down and open up, as I've heard you talk about it, is we're going to take it slow going over the bump. But the open up part is really important, which is we don't necessarily have to solve this problem with just the people who are in the room at the moment, right? We have time and space to invite more people in, or even better, to go out of the room to other people where they are and bring the conversation to them and see what kind of creativity it can open up.
Yeah, in fact, it's an obligation to see if we can get the broadest possible participation in when it comes to any complex issue. You know, one of the things I always noticed was that it was always the same people that showed up to the council meetings. So it was always the same people that came to the public meetings, the neighborhood meetings. And we were only getting a very narrow perspective on issues, very limited input. And oftentimes it was people that have been doing that and participating for years and years and years. And we were absent fresh ideas. We were absent any youth participation. We were absent because of the way we structured our council meetings. People couldn't get off work to come to the council meetings. Working mothers who've got to pick up their kids at daycare, after their work, single moms, we weren't hearing all those voices. And so I think when we talk about slowing down and opening up, it means first, let's slow down and see if we have everybody in the room that needs to be here. And second, let's make sure that we give ourselves time to really hear all the different perspectives.
I'm thinking I just spoke to a council member this morning, and we were talking about something very similar. She was telling me that just last night at her council, there was someone who came to the public comments section and delivered an impassioned statement to the council about how disappointed they were. And I haven't heard the comments, but they were angry, they were upset, they were fearful perhaps, and how the council just sat there because it's an unagendized public comment that they're not allowed to respond and talk about the substance of everything. Now, I'm not an attorney and I'm not a town clerk, and everyone should do what's advised by theirs. But one of my observations is, while we can't respond and talk about the policy matter that the person has brought up, to my understanding, there's nothing that would prevent a council member from at least responding and acknowledging the pain, the fear, the concern that they've heard expressed, and just do an acknowledgement of that. Enough to say, thank you for sharing that. I hear the pain, the concern, and what you have, and I just want to assure you that your message has been received. And that kind of slowing down is also a beginning to making people feel that their message has not fallen on deaf ears.
I think that is not done nearly enough, Matt. A simple acknowledgement, a sincere acknowledgement that, yes, thank you for taking the time to come to the meeting tonight. Thank you for taking the time to share. Thank you for being articulate about it. And thank you for observing the decorum of the meeting in the process. We're all benefited, we all benefit from that. Those kinds of personal exchanges without violating Robert's rules by getting into, or the rules of the council, by getting into the actual meat and potatoes of the comment is really important. It's very human. It humanizes the meeting. You've also heard me say, I don't think you should expect to show up to city council and ever feel defeated and I think that that's something that a lot of people will describe, saying, geez, I went to the city council meeting and I said what I wanted to say, and you know what? They didn't say anything. And I think I might as well have just been talking to a wall.
Let's bring up Mayor Herb Drinkwater,
Okay.
who you worked for, because I know that there's a quote in there from Herb, who said that no one should leave City Hall feeling defeated. There's always something we can do to help.
That was part of the city's core values that the mayor was reflecting. And the core value was listen, communicate, and listen. It's sort of a offshoot of that. But when I first went to work for the mayor, he sat me down, like, as a teenager or something. He sat me down and said, people are going to come into my office and they're going to want something. And sometimes we're not going to be able to satisfy their request. But I don't want anybody ever leaving my office feeling defeated, that they'd lost something. There's always something that we can do, whether it's schedule another meeting or take a fresh look at it or invite somebody else or something, the action that happens subsequent. It just was such a profound new understanding for me about how government should work. And I should add one more thing to that. They will never leave this office feeling defeated, and they will always feel that their dignity is intact. They should never feel diminished as a human being. And those are those guided every interaction that we had with people that came into the mayor's office.
Not just that concept, but the mayor's practice of it had a pretty big impact on you, yes?
Had a huge impact because he was, once again, he is a master at building trust by having his actions in alignment with his words. He didn't break his word. His handshake was as good as a written contract.
I'm going to put you on the spot on this question,
Okay,
John.
all right.
If you could send a message back in time to Mayor Drinkwater, a very short message, let's say to 1996 as he's finishing 16 years of service, what message would you want to send him from the year 2026?
I'd say thank you for giving us an example of the dignity of public service. It's an honorable profession that has been denigrated, I think. I would say, Mayor, you made people proud to be in public service. You made it seem as if it wasn't just a job, but it was a calling, which in my case, it was a calling. And I want to thank you for reinforcing that. People maybe back in the early 1990s or 1980s, mayor, used to talk about people ended up in government because they couldn't make it in the private sector. But the mayor made it seem like it was the most important job in the world. And I would thank him for that.
You had the mayor, the city manager at the time in Scottsdale was Dick Powers,
Yeah.
and also a very important mentor to you. And I think what I would just observe is that when you worked for Dick, when you served under the mayor, that was you practicing your idealism at scale. Like the city of Scottsdale and your experience as you evolved through it was very much about living up to the ideals that JFK would have inspired you as a young kid.
It was. It's exactly. I feel so fortunate that I believe that my life has experienced just terrific alignment from a very early age of wanting to do something important, meaningful, impactful, to having the opportunity to do that, and to work alongside people that believed, like I did, that public service is an honorable, important profession. I used to do a lot of research into public participation, the profession of public service. And one of the things, I think Harvard University did a study many, many years ago. I think it was published in the Business Review. And they interviewed people who were in public service, in leadership positions. And the question was, would you recommend your job to your own children as something that they should pursue? And only, I think it was 9% at that time said, yes, that I think I would like my son or daughter to do what I do today, whether it was a city manager, mayor, elected official. And I thought to myself, that is a crisis. That's a crisis. That's people who look at their jobs as jobs and not as a calling. And so I've worked really hard to encourage young people to go into public service. It's never paid quite as well as the equivalent jobs in the private sector, but it is so gratifying to build something called community, which is, I know, that's your bread and butter, Matt, is we're trying to build communities of people. And that's what we're doing.
It's exactly what we're doing. John, as I was going back through our notes from 2017, I found a through line in your thinking. It was the conviction that you said then, and I know I've heard you say a number of times since, nothing works if you don't raise your hand as an approach to local government. I want to unpack it. What do you think it means at its core? Is this about, in local government, is this about courage or ownership? Or I was also wondering if it's like maturity or duty. What's the message that you tell local people to say local governance only works as long as you raise your hand?
The last word you used is it. It's duty. Nothing irritates me more than people who think that the hard work of building community and participating in public policy making is the work of somebody else. And then we sit and they sit and grouse about the decisions that are made. You've got to raise your hand. You've got to step up. It's a responsibility, and it is a duty. It's much like jury duty. We have an obligation when we're called to serve. I really get angry. I really get, even when friends say, I got called for jury duty. And, I'll think of some reason that, so I don't have to go down there and serve. And I say, no, don't say that because I'm going to lose respect for you. Go serve. It's what we should do. It's just part of public service. And so is charitable giving. Raise your hand. So is volunteerism. Raise your hand. So is, being a hall monitor and going to the school conferences with your kids. Raise your hand, get involved.
So what are you saying? That people's frustration with government, let's say with local government specifically, do you put the blame on the structure of local government for being frustrating and bureaucratic and inflexible? Or do you put equal weight or more into the idea of, hey, if you want to influence this, if you want to advocate for something, you got to get involved. And yes, there is a process. There's a reason there's a process, but nothing works unless you actually get yourself into the process.
I think sometimes government puts up barriers without really understanding it. I don't think it's malicious. I just think that we do. Let's say, Matt, a block away, developer's going to put in a assisted care living facility. The rules at the city say that they have to notice residents within 700 feet. Well, why is that 700 feet? Why isn't it 800 feet? Why isn't it 1,000 feet? Why do we create rules for participation? Why do we only hold 3 public hearings on important budget meetings? We say we want people involved, and then we don't build the infrastructure and the policies and the procedures and the practices for getting them involved. I'll tell you one thing that is really frustrating, has always been frustrating to me. We'd have a zoning hearing on a new project. And I'm telling you that oftentimes you'd hear the staff say, well, here's what we're going to do. We'll have the developer come and they're going to put up easels with pictures of the project. And then when the people come, we'll have them fill out index cards of their questions. And I'm thinking, somebody's going to drive 8 miles there after work. They probably should have been doing something else, but they come to the meeting and they get to fill out an index card. They don't get to interact. What is that? That is the illusion of participation. It is not participation. It's an excuse to say, well, we had a public meeting on the project. I think things like that should be vestiges of the past. If you're going to invite people to come, then you better put in place systems, processes, or technologies to allow them to participate. You do that using technology beautifully to make sure voices are heard. And not only that, you are able to make sure that louder voices aren't inordinately overheard, and that everyone feels like this is a level playing field for all of us. So I think there's so much more creativity and work that could go into creating real participation versus what I consider to be fake participation.
Are you as frustrated as so many local leaders that social media has just become a toxic cesspool of negativity? And it's not at all, the promise that it was going to bring people together and connect them really has been disappointing. It has allowed people to dwell in anger and frustration and collective misery, but it's not really productive, at least hasn't yet proven productive for community building at the local level.
Yeah, I think that's a rabbit hole that we could go down and spend a lot of time on. I think this might be a good time for me to just share, I think, my most significant disappointment in my own professional life, which was when I mentioned before, as a young kid, I've been looking for opportunities to serve. And so after I left the city and retired from city management, I decided I was going to do the one thing I'd always wanted to do, and that was run for public office. I wanted to run a campaign, and the newspaper was very excited about my candidacy, and they said that he's a retail politician, they said, meaning I'm boots on the ground. And I'm a baby kisser, I'm a hugger, I like to interact with people. I'd love to speak to ballrooms full of 250, 300 people at a time. I want to shake hands. I want to look people in the eye. I want to hear them. Is how I had imagined it to be.
And so you decided to run for Scottsdale City Council.
I did. And it unfortunately coincided with COVID. And all the things I just mentioned, I couldn't do. I couldn't even doing the traditional, most fundamental grassroots things that politicians do, which is knock on people's doors. Hi, how you doing? Nice to meet you. I'm John Little. I'm running for the Scottsdale City Council. I'd like to know what you think is important in this community, what you need. I'd like to hear from you. People wouldn't answer their door. They didn't, it was COVID. They didn't, if you show up at their home at night wearing a mask, you're not going to get in. I couldn't go to we didn't have any meetings. And so I had to run an entire campaign on Zoom. And to this day, I'm so averse to Zoom calls. It was like something happened. I can't do it. I don't want to be on it to this very day, because it was such a disappointment that I'd waited my entire career to do this, and then I couldn't do it my way. And I tried, I did all the Zoom debates, and I got myself out there on social media and everything. I think I lost by 2,000 votes, very small percentage point. But the fact of the matter was, I felt good that I'd raised my hand. I just felt that I'd missed an opportunity to do it. And so people that might be listening to this podcast say, well, why doesn't he just do it again? Well, it's something, once again, sort of fundamental to my belief, and that is that I've been doing it for a long time. And I think that the next generation, I'm really excited to see them step up. I would like to see younger people run for public office. because the decisions they make are the ones they're going to have to live with. I likely will not be around to see the resolve of the water crisis in the desert Southwest. That'll be a multi-generational issue, and the younger people today are the ones that are going to have to live with that.
That speaks to a whole other area I was going to ask you about, the responsibility of local leaders to not only to think in the future for what they can plan, but to think about the succession of leadership in their communities, what they're doing to bring new people into the process of governance, to invest young people in a sense of ownership for their community going forward. Is that something that you thought about consciously earlier in your career, or do you think that's a reflection that came to you later in your career?
No, that was early in my career. I'm glad this is a great question, because we've missed the boat. I think that young people aren't interested in service. They have a great disdain these days for politicians. There's so much work to do to turn the tide, to invite them in, to help them understand the important role they play, that they're going to play in their own lives. Whether it was the Peace Corps or, going to Vietnam, young people have always had a huge impact. And I'm just worried that we're not seeing that same level of commitment these days. But it's vitally important. And when we talk about slowing down and opening up means making sure everybody's there at the table, taking the time to make sure everybody's invited. And we have so little innovation in outreach to young people. I think we need a special effort to re-engage the next generation.
John, you held a lot of positions at the city of Scottsdale. The title that I always thought was the coolest one you had was Director of Organizational Development. And I wonder if there was ever a time at the city of Scottsdale where there was actually a staff function that was dedicated to developing, I'm not sure what it would be, constituency or ownership or next generation engagement for the city, with the idea that it's actually a core city responsibility to be thinking about how we connect with and engage the next generation. Has that ever been a function that you were aware of or led at the city of Scottsdale itself?
So in the mid 1990s, there was a tremendous building boom. Scottsdale, by the way, in 1980 was about 80,000 people. And by 2010, it was 285,000 people. And so there's been a lot of construction. There's been a lot of building. And so we recognized at the city that one of those things that we weren't seeing young people coming out of school with is the skill and certifications in building inspection. And so we had all these buildings and projects going forward, and the private sector and the developers were going crazy because we couldn't get their buildings inspected fast enough. And so time was money. They were losing lots and lots of money. So we went to the local community college and said, if you build a curriculum for building inspectors, we'll guarantee them jobs at the city. You can just tell them, if you make it through the curriculum and when you come out, you're going to have a job at the city of Scottsdale. And we promised jobs. And so we got the community college to build that curriculum, and we hired the next generation of building inspectors. And that was very gratifying because we saw what was happening, and we reached into the educational system to respond to that need. And I think the same thing's true with technology and AI. And we also are not getting a lot of young people interested that are coming out of schools with the skills in hydrology that are going to need to be a key element of our city here and other cities in the desert Southwest as it relates to resolving the drought issues and the water shortages, which we all know are coming. So, but that's another multi-generational issue.
John, how do you think the challenges facing local leaders today are fundamentally different from what you encountered early in your career? Or are the challenges essentially the same?
Well, I think one of the big issues, and I hate to say it, but it's safety and security. I'm surprised at how many threats and attacks have happened
On local leaders.
And
that was a dimension you didn't ever have to think about early in your career?
No. Early in my career, we thought it was a big deal if somebody got, I'll tell you a quick story. So there was a woman that lived next to a golf course in Scottsdale, and she complained for years that the city failed to put up a large screen to protect her yard. And she kept saying, you got to put up a screen. You got it for years and years and years. And the city never responded to her. And so one day she came to City Hall with a wheelbarrow full of golf balls and went up on the elevator and dropped them all in my office all over the floor. Being a golfer, I wasn't too unhappy with that. But those kinds of interactions were some of the most direct kind of the way anger manifested itself. Today, it manifests itself in attacks on social media, personal attacks. People are using your face, your voice, using AI to make you say things that you never did, or give the appearance. So I think it's an incredibly challenging time and a dangerous time to be in public service. And for that reason, it's more important than ever that we get people who are courageous. We talk about having courageous conversations at Social Prosperity. Courageous conversations require people to feel like they can speak their minds without fear of retribution or violence.
But courage was never meant to imply that you had to have courage to stand in the face of death threats or having family members accosted or to deal with all kinds of just awful things being said and posted about you in online forums.
Yeah, and I don't mean to make it sound like this is sort of focused on local elected officials, although it is. I've seen statistics on school board members being threatened and council members being threatened. But Matt, let's be real about it. We've seen corporate executives assassinated. We've people who are murdered, because of their religion. It's a violent place to be public. As a public person, there's the potential of violence that never existed before.
John, if someone's listening to this right now, they're just starting their career in public administration, or maybe they're just thinking it's time for them to raise their hand, to apply for an appointed position on a commission or run for public office, and they want to serve well. What is the one message that you would give to them? What would you urge them to adopt from the very beginning of whatever would be their service?
I think respect. To make sure that the people that they interact with, they show great respect for. Even people with different opinions, thoughts, values, that we need to respect each other. And I think that people coming into the public service need to know that they're not going to be doing something to people, but they're going to be doing something with people. And I think really I would give them, my advice to them would be to make sure that they are being respectful, showing people dignity, listening, being open and willing to listen to all perspectives, to suspend their own beliefs while they listen to someone else talk. I think it's a very internal thing. It's a very personal thing. It's decisions and skills that I think we all need to reflect on. Are we willing to do the job?
It's a really interesting observation that you focus on respect. Think of all the things that exist in our communities that cause people to feel disrespected. We wait on lines to go through airport security. We have healthcare systems that make us wait and turn down claims. I could go on, lots and lots of examples. What you're suggesting is that local government in particular should be a source of respect that people who interact with it should come away not feeling diminished and believing in the potential of what the work can do for them and what they can accomplish through the avenue of local government. That's what you're talking about. That's respect.
Just putting it in its most simple form would be being a really good public servant is not so much about getting my own needs for service met, but it's about the other person. It's about the larger community. It is sort of that servant leadership model that we need to put ourselves in a servant mode, that we're here to serve. And that means listen and perform well with integrity and trust.
If you could send a message to your younger self in Minneapolis, that young, inspired, idealistic, but not yet tested John Little, what would you tell him about what it truly means to serve a community?
Well, we'll talk about John Kennedy again. In reading the book, as I did at a very young age, Profiles in Courage, the message is be prepared to make a sacrifice, because you will sacrifice time away from your family. You may sacrifice your personal security. You may sacrifice income that you could have made in the private sector more. You may even put your own life at risk, depending on what kind of public service you choose. But I think leadership and in the public service expect to have to sacrifice. And so weigh that carefully, that it's not going to be always joyful. It's not going to be always satisfying. It's going to be frustrating. It's going to have a lot of pitfalls along the way, a lot of success, but also failures as well. But I think the notion of sacrifice is something I would want to make sure that it was communicated.
Is it your message that it's ultimately worth it?
I think unquestionably it's worth it. It's a life's work. It is. It's the most gratifying career choice I think people can make, to be in the public service, or if it's not a career, if it's a elected official, a mayor or a city council member. But that once you make that choice, and once you're given the responsibility and you take your oath of office, it's invigorating. It lifts you up. It lets you know that there's important work to be done. And I think it's a marvelous, it's a wonderful contribution that we make to our community.
Well, John, you've certainly made a lot of marvelous contributions to this community and to others as well. And, we've been talking about sitting down and having this conversation for a very long time. And I really just want to say thank you for letting me sit you down for a couple of hours and go through all of this. This conversation means more to me than I could possibly say in words. That said, I'm still going to say some words of appreciation. The work we've done together rests on shared values. That's what we recognized in each other early on. Among them, responsibility, dignity, patience, integrity, courage, and the belief that communities are worth the effort it takes to strengthen them. And those values, many of which we might have aligned, but I heard you articulate them before I had the words for them. Those values didn't just shape Social Prosperity Partners, they shaped me personally. It is rare, it is precious to find a friend and a colleague with whom you align so deeply on what matters most. So I just want to say thank you for your partnership, your steadiness, your intellectual foundation, because you've given me a ton of it. And I respect you, I admire you, I love you, my friend, and I thank you so much for joining me for this conversation.
Thank you, Matt. And I'm glad you added love to the equation, because that's a big part of who we are. It's a big part of what we do. Thank you.
So,
this is from 2017, and you'd asked me to write what I thought a definition of social prosperity was. So this is what I wrote. Definition of social prosperity: a new approach to community building that is predicated on the belief that our collective opinions, worldviews, core values, fears, hopes, and dreams hold the key to finding common ground upon which we can rebuild trust, resolve disputes, and create stronger communities. Social prosperity partners believe that there is inherent intrinsic wealth and value in communities of people. We believe there are opportunities for learning and collaboration when people come together to solve problems. It's expected that people will have oppositional interests and conflicting core beliefs and values. Rather than seeing those differences as obstacles to overcome, social prosperity recognizes these differences as resources to express and respect. Social prosperity partners understands communities of passionate people find themselves increasingly at odds with those whose beliefs or worldviews may be in stark contrast. Accordingly, they dig in ready to defend while also planning their next offensive. Social prosperity partners recognize that we are people oftentimes at war with ourselves, and that young Americans in particular are turning off and tuning out what they consider to be pointless noise of fake participation. They watch with skepticism as decision makers manipulate public processes, imposing policies on people that have multi-generational consequences. It has become increasingly clear Americans have diminished confidence in our collective ability to accomplish anything of lasting value. They dismiss our judicial system as not fair. Wall Street's devoid of morality, and the weaponry we are bringing to the front lines of our culture wars are threatening to wreak irrecoverable damage to public confidence in public institutions, undermining our very democracy. Fear, suspicion, and lack of trust are the most dangerous social pathologies in our lives. Social prosperity partners believes we must effect a 180-degree turn. Social prosperity partners are aware of key policy issues impacting education, public safety, development, environment, race, healthcare, which are increasingly being decided behind closed doors. The consequence of this insular approach to public involvement has been the torrential erosion of trust in our public institutions, corporate America, and sadly, each other. Accordingly, profound important information remains undiscovered or unexpressed, usually attributable to fear, intimidation, ignorance, anger, or distrust. Fear of speaking out for fear of being ridiculed or pilloried or trolled keeps critical facts and opinions from finding their way into crucial discussions. Today, those who pay attention to this collective cultural dysfunction find it much easier to observe and comment on the effects of polarization and disenfranchisement than to devise effective approaches which could change the nature of the dynamic. Social prosperity partners understands and believes in the importance of bringing all voices to the table in an environment that not only protects the integrity of all points of view, but celebrates their courageous public expression. Social prosperity partners respects the complexity of people and issues. We acknowledge that everyone brings values, histories, experience, beliefs, and their own facts to any discussion. We know how to construct processes with level playing fields, that we can help people reach solutions that are grounded in integrity and mutual respect. Our goal is not merely to reach consensus or provide conclusions and sets of recommendations, but to rebuild trust and respect among all of us who must live in this place we call our community.
My thanks again to my emeritus partner, John Little, for reflecting with me on the values at the heart of social prosperity partners. Let me tell you what I'm going to carry forward not just from this conversation, but from decades of friendship and partnership. I've watched John carry a steady orientation toward public life, not performative, not reactive, steady. A belief that fear must be acknowledged but not obeyed, that urgency must be tempered by judgment, that responsibility begins with the willingness to step forward, and that institutions deserve care because they will outlast us. I share John's conviction that civic life is not self-sustaining. It depends on people of character who are willing to practice responsibility, regulate emotion, listen with intention, and treat institutions as something entrusted to them. For those who serve on councils and school boards, commissions, or in civic organizations of any kind, perhaps the deeper truth is this: values are not ornamental, they are operational. They shape how we respond when rooms grow tense, when criticism stings, and when decisions carry real consequence. Healthy civic culture does not happen by accident. It is built patiently and intentionally by people who choose responsibility over reaction and who still believe that citizenship asks something of them, not just something for them. Community Catalyst is edited by Nick Living the Dream Tantillo. For many years, our executive producer has been John Little. I'm Matt Lehrman of Social Prosperity Partners. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with another Community Catalyst.